millimetres here and there towards East Anglia and the southeast, for example. And then on Saturday, high pressure building back in. Again, a lot of fine weather around, if rather cloudy, just a few sunny spells. Thicker cloud for a time in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. May just squeeze out a few spots of rain, 1 or 2 light showers. But most places on Saturday and indeed on Sunday are looking dry. Though on Sunday, northwest Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland could see a little bit of rain moving in as the day goes on. As always, a forecast for where you are or where you're going, online and through the app.
At 6, Ukraine's abandoned children, displaced by war, and investigation finds some of the most vulnerable have been left behind in institutions. A special report from a facility in southwest Ukraine where disabled children have been taken by carers and then just left behind.
Because of their disabilities, they're not treated as human beings, they're only kept alive here.
Also on the programme tonight. As Russia hits power stations in western Ukraine, the European Union sets out plans to maximise the pressure with more sanctions on Russia, including a complete ban on oil imports. Political parties take part in a final day of campaigning for local elections in England, Scotland and Wales, and the elections for the Northern Ireland Assembly. Could this be Chelsea's new owner? Britain's richest man, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, talks to the BBC about his bid for the club. It's been rejected, but he says he's not giving up. And a memorial is unveiled to honour those who served on HMS Sheffield, hit by an Argentine missile during the Falklands War 40 years ago.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, can Manchester City join Liverpool in the Champions League final? Pep Guardiola's men are in the Spanish capital to take on the 13-time winners Real Madrid.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Thousands of disabled children in Ukraine have been abandoned in institutions that can't look after them. That's according to a human rights organisation. An investigation carried out by the group Disability Rights International found severely disabled children tied to beds in children's homes that are unable to cope. Many have been moved away from the fighting and just left at other unsuitable facilities further away from the war. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports from an institution in the relative safety of southwest Ukraine where disabled children from the east have been left by their carers who then fled to neighbouring countries. Just to warn you, you may find his report distressing.
Here's the sound of the war you haven't heard yet. Anna's teeth-grinding anxiety hints at the hidden trauma of Ukraine's disabled children. The conflict's most vulnerable and least visible victims. They are nervous, disorientated and distressed.
They're not treated as human beings, they're only kept alive here.
And they've been dumped in a place that can barely cope.
Are you certain you can give these children the care they need?
The director couldn't believe how their carers fled and left these children behind.
They were so selfish that they ran out of here as fast as they could. I thought they'd come here and tell us who had epilepsy, who was incontinent, and so on. But then they sat here till lunchtime and left. I don't like criticizing my colleagues, but this is not the way it's done.
Victoria's one of 22 children moved here from an orphanage in Donetsk, left behind when the less severely disabled were taken to Germany. She has frequent seizures and we're told she's put in restraints at night. Victoria is 14 years old. In fact, These are all teenage girls. The nurse tells me she's not used to dealing with this level of disability, and she believes the children aren't able to understand their situation. She asks, what intellect can you see here?
My heart breaks, actually, as a mother of 2 children.
Disability rights experts are documenting these conditions.
Even though they're in a safe place, their state will deteriorate with time because they are not getting any kind of stimulation, any kind of rehabilitation. And to me, this is further disabling them.
These were confined lives of institutionalised dependence long before the war. There's no future beyond these walls. These homes are relics of an outdated system. The boss insists a resident sings for us. Staff shortages mean older residents help care for these children, and those in from the east have much greater needs than this place can handle. The disability rights investigators filmed at 3 more nearby institutions struggling with fragile young arrivals.
They barely had a time to give them any individual attention before the war. Now they are left lying in cribs, lying in beds, tied down, total neglect. It's very dangerous. These children with disabilities are paying the price for the war.
This flies in the face of any sort of international good practice in terms of the care these girls should be receiving. But then, on the other hand, this is people trying to do their best in the toughest of circumstances.
We were told Oksana couldn't speak because of severe learning disabilities, but Helena makes a connection.
She says in a full sentence that her toe hurts.
And then Oksana spots our microphone. There's a flicker of the potential that could be unlocked.
Are you taking my job, Oksana?
There's a call for these children to get more international support or the love and care of a family. But when so many Ukrainians are running from war, it looks like thousands will still face lives of loss and waste, unseen and unheard. Dan Johnson, BBC News in southwestern Ukraine.
The European Union has announced plans for a total ban on oil imports from Russia by the end of the year. Around 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil are imported into the EU every day. In return, Russia is being paid up to $500 million a day for it. The proposed ban on Russian oil is one of a number of tough new measures being put forward by the European Commission to intensify the pressure on Russia. In Ukraine, Russian strikes have hit 3 power stations in the western city of Lviv. In the besieged port city of Mariupol, the mayor says he has lost contact with the last remaining forces resisting Russian troops at the steelworks as heavy fighting continues there. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports from Kyiv.
It's been 10 weeks of war, and Russia is still attacking Ukraine from east to west. This was a power station in Lviv after a missile strike. Moscow's boasting of its success, filming as it fires on its neighbour. It says it's targeting supply routes for weapons from the US and Europe, but it's hitting far more than that. So the European Commission wants to ramp up the pressure on Moscow. It's proposing that EU countries end Russian oil imports, though not gas. The Commissioner said Vladimir Putin should pay a high price for his brutal aggression.
Today, we are addressing our dependency on Russian oil, and let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it. So today, we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be
save the military of Mariupol.
But the sanctions need unanimous support. And while Europe argues, these women's relatives are under fire. The last Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol. They're encircled by Russian forces at a giant steelworks. Mariupol's mayor believes there's up to 30 children among the civilians still with them. And across the Donbass region, the fighting is relentless. The local governor says no city here is now safe. Around Kyiv, they know exactly how that feels. Staff at this hospital near Ukraine's capital talk of operating under fire, saving the lives of wounded civilians, but in terrible danger themselves.
These are the missiles that hit the hospital.
I asked the hospital director what she thinks about Western sanctions. Galina thinks some countries don't understand what's happening here. She says perhaps they don't believe it, but they should. Hungary's already said it'll veto the ban on oil imports.
With the wreckage of war all around, many Ukrainians struggle to understand why the West would even hesitate about sanctioning Russia. Because the point you hear time and again here is that every dollar spent on Russian oil and gas is funding a military that's doing all this.
Ukraine did defend its capital, but Russia's war has shifted focus now. It hasn't stopped. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Kiev.
Our global trade correspondent Darshini David is with me now. What impact would a total ban on oil imports have both here and across the EU?
Well, Sophie, if this happens, this would be the biggest financial blow dealt against Russia since the conflict started. And for the Russian government, it's seen a massive windfall in recent months because of those soaring energy prices. It could make enough without embargoes to fund the majority of its spending plans simply from selling oil abroad. And guess what? Half of that money comes from Europe, from fueling cars to heating homes. The EU spends hundreds of millions of pounds every day on buying Russian oil. Money, as we were hearing there, that is basically going towards funding a war on its doorstep. So without that cash, Russia could struggle. It could struggle to replace that money because its next biggest customer, China, only buys a fifth of its exports. But the flip side is that experts are warning that we could see more volatility in oil prices as the EU looks around for alternative supplies. What does volatility mean? It tends to mean higher prices. That could benefit the Kremlin in terms of the money it gets per barrel of oil. The flip side is it could mean higher prices for consumers, be that drivers or businesses across the world, including here in the UK, when they least need it.
Darshini, thank you. It's the final full day of campaigning ahead of elections across the UK tomorrow. Voters in England, Wales and Scotland will choose who they want to run services that affect their everyday lives. People in Northern Ireland will choose their representatives at Stormont. In England, ballots are being held for 146 councils, mainly in towns and cities. There are also some mayoral elections. In Scotland, every local authority, that's 32 in total, is being contested. All of the seats in 22 local councils across Wales are up for election. In Northern Ireland, voters will elect all of the 90 members of the Legislative Assembly. In a moment, we'll hear from Vicky Young at Westminster, James Cook in Glasgow, Hal Griffith in Barry. But first, to Emma Vardy, who is at Stormont. Emma.
Elections in Northern Ireland are often characterised as a battle between those who want to remain part of the UK and those who want to become a united Ireland. And this is being called the most important election here for a generation. That is because the polls are indicating that for the first time in the history of Northern Ireland, a nationalist party could be set to win the most seats. Sinn Féin are hoping they are on course to beat the Democratic Unionist Party and be entitled to claim the First Minister role. Now, the DUP has been telling people they are the only party to safeguard the union, that a vote for them is the only way to prevent a border poll, that referendum on a united Ireland that Sinn Féin ultimately won. Sinn Féin, though, haven't been talking much about this at all. Instead, they've been focusing on issues like the cost of living. But whatever the result, Sophie, after polling day, we're unlikely to end up with a fully functioning government here. That is because the DUP has already said it's not going back into the power-sharing executive unless it gets changes to the Brexit arrangements, that Irish sea border that it dislikes so much. But finally here, in what is sometimes seen as a divided place, elections in recent years have shown us that increasing numbers of people are voting for middle ground, cross-community parties, and how well those parties do this time around will also tell us a lot about what is happening here.
Emma Vardy with the situation in Northern Ireland. What about Scotland? James Cook is in Glasgow for us. James.
Yes, Sophie, and the political landscape has changed really rather dramatically in Scotland over the past generation. If you think about it, 25 years ago this week, Tony Blair came to power at Westminster with New Labour. And 15 years ago this week, the Scottish National Party took charge of the devolved administration in Edinburgh. In historical terms, what's striking is how short the gap was between those two events, and things have continued to change since then. The SNP have strengthened their position at the expense of the Labour Party, including here in Glasgow, in many ways the heartland of the Labour movement, where the SNP now run the council. What's going to happen this time? That, of course, is up to the voters. As you say, they'll be choosing more than 1,200 councillors in 32 councils around the country, and they will be considering many things, including local issues such as bin collection and libraries and schools and so on, but there'll also be questions that might be answered on a national level. How much support is there for independence, for Scottish independence, for example? Have the Conservatives been damaged by the parties which were held at Westminster, Whitehall and in Downing Street itself, particularly given that the Scottish Conservative Party leader Douglas Ross at one point called for the Prime Minister to resign and then changed his position and withdrew that call? And of course, what about Labour? Are there any positive signs for Sir Keir Starmer, for his Labour Party, of a revival? Those are some of the questions that we might find out. They only count during the day in these elections in Scotland. They're counting on Friday. We might have some answers by Friday evening.
James Cook, thank you. And what about the picture in Wales? Hal Griffith.
Well, Sophie, the Labour Party's been the dominant force in Welsh politics in every election, really, for the last century. But back in 2017, in the last local elections here, their grip was weakened a little. They lost over 100 council seats. They only held overall control in 7 of the 22 local authority areas. Plaid Cymru and the Conservatives took 1 council each, but the rest of the Welsh political map, well, that was largely a grey area, coloured grey to denote all the little coalitions and the strong role of independent councillors too. So on Friday, when we get the results, look out for those grey areas turning primary colours, potentially this area of the Vale of Glamorgan. Now, Labour and the Conservatives have held this place before, but they will be fighting each other pretty hard. And while it's all about local issues, again, such as libraries and schools and council tax rates, voters may also look at national leadership, particularly the prominent role of Mark Drakeford, the Welsh First Minister from Labour, and also Boris Johnson's reputation at the moment for the Conservatives. One other factor to note in Wales: 16 and 17-year-olds get a vote here. The counting won't begin until Friday morning. We may get the first early results on Friday afternoon.
Hal Griffith, thank you. And Vicky Young in Westminster. What about England?
Well, the focus in England really is on urban areas. Almost half of the seats up for grabs are in London. Now, of course, the truth is that local elections really tell us very little about what might happen in a general election. That's partly, of course, because far few people vote. They're voting on local issues. And, of course, in large swathes of the country, there are no elections at all. But, of course, it is possible to detect patterns. And there's an awful lot of management expectation going on. The Conservatives already saying they don't expect to do too well, predicting that they might lose even hundreds of seats. Labour and the Greens are hoping for gains. The Liberal Democrats very keen to show that they are the main challenger to the Tories in the south and in the southwest. Now, of course, they can also affect the national mood of politics, particularly for the leaders. Boris Johnson, a man who's been under an awful lot of pressure. Lots of his MPs will be looking to see if he is still a winner. For Labour, of course, their MPs looking to Sir Keir Starmer to see if he's putting them back on the path to power. We might have the answer to some of those questions as the results come in overnight Thursday into Friday.
Vicky Young and all our correspondents across the United Kingdom, thank you. For more information on the latest developments and to find out what's happening in your area, do visit bbc.co.uk/news, or you can go to the BBC News app. The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. An investigation says thousands of disabled children in Ukraine have been left behind in institutions. And coming up,
I'm in Madrid, where Real stand between Manchester City and their dream of a second successive Champions League final, an all-English affair against Liverpool.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, the Women's Super League title could be decided tonight, but Arsenal can ensure the race against Chelsea goes to the final day if they get at least a draw against rivals Tottenham.
40 years ago today, the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Sheffield was sunk after it was hit by an Argentinian jet during the Falklands War. It was the first British warship to sink in enemy action since World War II. 20 crewmen died and the ship was fatally damaged. Today, a memorial in honour of those who served on the ship has been unveiled at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. Phil Mackey has this report.
It was the moment the reality of the Falklands War struck home. HMS Sheffield was the first British ship to be sunk in action since the Second World War.
HMS Sheffield, a Type 42 destroyer, was attacked and hit late this afternoon by an Argentine missile.
20 lives were lost, their names etched onto the Armed Forces Memorial. Dave Harrington suffered 20% burns. He was a stoker and in the engine room when the missile struck.
There was a thump, that's all I can describe it as, and about 2 seconds later a fireball. It totally covered me, and one of my nightmares regularly now is that I can still see myself with my hands up to my face, screaming and seeing my reflection in the flames. It was quite harrowing, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, and you still have nightmares now?
Oh God, yeah, regularly.
And on this day we particularly remember the 20 men of HMS Sheffield, ship's company, who perished.
Despite the driving rain, survivors gathered today to remember their friends who didn't make it. This is what will stand as a tribute to those who died. Fittingly, it's made out of Sheffield steel.
Well, it wasn't just a memorial service today because a lot of the people here haven't seen each other for 40 years, so it was a great chance for them to have a reunion and remember what happened.
It's sometimes difficult to remember. This was a day old comrades will never forget. Phil Mackey, BBC News, the National Memorial Arboretum.
Some of today's other news now, and a man who shot, stabbed and smothered his young son to death has been found guilty of murder. Lukasz Chapler killed 2-year-old Julius at his home in November 2020 after splitting up with the boy's mother. Chapler was given a life sentence and the judge said he would serve at least 23 years before being eligible to apply for parole. The Buy Now, Pay Later service Klarna will start telling credit agencies which of their customers pays on time and who falls behind. From June, banks and credit card firms will be able to see people's Klarna habits when making credit checks. The firm believes the move will help improve affordability assessments. The man who murdered Sarah Everard and the man and woman who killed 6-year-old Arthur Labignio Hughes are among 5 people appealing the punishments handed down for their crimes. Senior judges are reviewing the sentences, which include 2 whole-life terms, and their findings could affect how whole-life orders are imposed in future. Our legal correspondent Dominic Casciani is following the proceedings at the Court of Appeal in London. Dominic.
Sophie, this is a really important, effectively super appeal here in London involving these very important cases. For 20 years, judges have had the power to impose whole life orders, which effectively means locking somebody up and throwing away the key. In fact, they've been more inclined to use the power than the politicians who had the power before them. But what's been clear in recent years is there's a bit of a grey area over exactly which types of very, very serious murders should possibly qualify for a whole life order. Hence this appeal today to try and wrestle through this and actually come up with some clearer guidelines for courts around the country. Now, the first and probably the most headlining cases is Wayne Couzens, who murdered Sarah Everard. In this case, he's appealing against his whole life order imposed last autumn. His lawyers told the court today that he should be in jail for decades to come, but short of a whole life order because he had shown remorse once he was in court. Now, the Crown's lawyers are disputing that, saying that the sentencing rules were clear. His crime was of such a high, serious nature because it undermined trust in the police that his permanent incarceration was a just punishment. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the case of Emma Tustin from Solihull, who murdered her stepson, Arthur Labignio Hughes. She was given a minimum term of 29 years. Now, the Attorney General wants that raised, saying she should have been considered for a whole life order when she was jailed. Her lawyers dispute that. Judges are now wrestling with this, and when they come back, whatever they come back with, will define murder sentencing for many decades to come. Back to you.
Done. Thank you. The American comedian Dave Chappelle has been attacked during a performance at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. Videos shared on social media showed someone running into Chappelle. In other clips, the comic seemed to be unharmed after returning to the stage at the Netflix Is a Joke festival. Chappelle faced criticism and protest last year when a programme he made for the streaming service was accused of being transphobic. Britain's richest man, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, says he's had positive conversations with the government over his offer to buy Chelsea Football Club. He's the founder and co-founder of the chemical group Ineos, which has invested heavily in other sports, including Formula One, cycling and sailing. Their bid for Chelsea came weeks after the March deadline and was rejected. But he's been telling our sports editor, Dan Roan, that he's not giving up.
He's already a serial investor in sport, but now Sir Jim Ratcliffe has his sights set on one of the world's biggest football clubs. The tycoon has made a last gasp £4 billion bid for Chelsea. And today in Madrid, in his first interview since his audacious move, the Ineos chief told me why he wants to take over at Stamford Bridge.
No, we're not interested in making money out of Chelsea. So the investment in Chelsea is a long-term thing. It's just whether can we run that club really, really well and turn it into, you know, one of the finest clubs in Europe. That's our ambition with Chelsea. No, we make lots of money in chemicals. We don't need to make money out of that.
Chelsea was put up for sale in March before owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned for his alleged links to Russian President Vladimir Putin following the invasion of Ukraine. A group headed up by US investor Todd Burley has emerged as the preferred bidder of the bank overseeing the sale. Ratcliffe missed 2 deadlines, so is he now out of the running?
Don't discount our offer. I think, you know, we are very British. We've got great intentions for the Chelsea club. I mean, we've had positive conversations with the government because there's been, I suppose, quite a lot of angst about Chelsea finishing up in the hands of people who don't have a long-term vision for it.
But you were late, isn't it your fault?
No, we were late, and that's our fault. I would agree with that, but...
Why were you late, out of interest?
It's a big decision to buy a national asset of the importance of a club like Chelsea. You know, we're not there for 5 years or 10 years. We're there for the long term, and that's quite a commitment, and that's quite a lot of responsibility to take on, and it takes time to reach a decision where you feel fully committed to that.
But you're a Manchester United fan, are you not?
You know, I have a split allegiance, effectively, really. When I was in London for many, many years, Chelsea I could go and watch. It was quite difficult to go and watch United.
Some would argue you should be trying to buy the club that you grew up supporting.
Yes, I mean, I can understand that, but Manchester United is not for sale.
There are concerns a takeover of the European champions could be jeopardised if Abramovich reconsiders a pledge to write off more than £1 billion that he's owed by the club. A licence to operate expires at the end of this month, with ministers warning the club's on borrowed time.
I can't imagine for a moment Chelsea would go out of business, but I think they could suffer next season if they're not sort of fully active in the transfer market. And in football, obviously, that's an important part of the year because, you know, you can't win tournaments if you don't have good players.
Whether Ratcliffe takes over or not, Chelsea's proposed deal is set to become the most expensive in sporting history. But for now, the club's future remains uncertain. Dan Roan, BBC News, Madrid.
This shirt, worn by Argentina's Diego Maradona in the quarterfinals of the 1986 World Cup against England, has sold in an online auction for £7.1 million. That's a world record sum for a piece of sports memorabilia. In the match, Maradona scored 2 legendary goals. One became known as the Hand of God. The former England midfielder, Steve Hodge, swapped shirts with his rival after the game, and he has owned it ever since. Manchester City are about to face Real Madrid in the second leg of their Champions League semi-final. The prospect of an all-English final against Liverpool beckons if they make it through. They're currently 4-3 up from the first leg. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks joins us now from the Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid. Natalie.
Well, the mission for Manchester City here tonight is very clear. Avoid defeat and make your second successive Champions League final. Last week's first leg was one of the greatest matches we've ever seen in the Champions League. City were dominant, yet they somehow conceded 3 goals and gave Real Madrid more than a sniff here tonight. They will be very aggressive. This will be a very tough game for City indeed. Over the weekend, actually, Madrid won the Spanish title and Carlo Ancelotti became the first manager to win the title in all of Europe's biggest 5 leagues. They're the 13 times winners of the European Cup. They believe wearing these colours they can do anything. The Champions League is the big prize, the one that City's owners so covet. Despite all that domestic success, this is the one that's eluded them so far, and really until they win this, those questions about how good they really are will remain. They lost 1-0 last year in the final to Chelsea, and this is Pep Guardiola as a manager. It's his 9th semi-final. I think all neutrals watching here tonight would really love to see City reach the final, because it will be, as you say, against Liverpool, and they are the two sides that have pushed each other so close all season.
A big night ahead. Natalie Perks in Madrid. Thank you. Time now for a look at the weather. Nick Miller is with us, and we're hoping you're going to sort of warm things up a little bit.
Well, you'll notice it a bit warmer tomorrow, but we've got something up our sleeve for next week, so keep an eye on the forecast for next week. Today, there's been rain heavy enough to be bouncing off the ground across some eastern areas today, some thundery showers, and even a funnel cloud here captured by one of our weather watchers in Lincolnshire. That's a tornado trying to form, but thankfully not touching the ground. The rainfall picture so far today shows just how lively these downpours have become this afternoon from eastern Scotland and down the eastern side of England. And they're gradually clearing away over the next few hours. Of course, it is useful rain in some areas that have been so very dry. For England and Wales, it will be mainly dry overnight. Some areas of mist and fog around. For Northern Ireland and Scotland, your cloud thickens again and there'll be some patchy rain moving in. And it's a cooler night and start to the day tomorrow. We've got high pressure just nudging in across at least England and Wales tomorrow for a largely settled day. You are in Scotland and Northern Ireland closer to weather fronts, so here a cloudy and in places damp start to the day. And through the day, further outbreaks of rain, especially in northwest Scotland, whereas elsewhere you'll keep a lot of cloud. You'll try to brighten up a bit more, especially in Northern Ireland. For England and Wales, you've got that high pressure close by, so none of those really heavy downpours that we've seen today, just the odd shower here and there, but you're more likely to stay dry, see a few sunny spells occasionally, and be warmer. Parts of Wales, the Midlands and southern England just creeping into the low 20s. Here's Thursday evening for you. The rain just starts to turn heavier in northwest Scotland, and it moves overnight and into Friday morning across Scotland and Northern Ireland, clearing then on Friday to sunny spells and showers into northern England, Wales, then into the Midlands. The sunny spells and the warmth lasting longest on Friday towards the southeast. Now, as we go overnight and into Saturday, this system some useful rain on it again for those driest parts of England. There'll be a few millimetres here and there before clearing by Saturday morning, and then another area of high pressure building in for the weekend. There'll be a lot of cloud around, some occasional pleasant sunny spells where it will feel quite warm. The chance on Sunday seeing a little rain moving into parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland. As I mentioned earlier, again, that hint of something warmer next week, Sophie. Keep watching.
I will. Thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.